Rashid was 32 years old and had, since the age of 14, worked in the small provision store his father had left him on a narrow lane at the edge of the mid-sized city where he had been born. He was not a stupid man. He knew how to keep books. He could add 3 columns of numbers in his head faster than his cousin who had gone to college in Karachi. But he had, at 8th grade, been quietly pulled out of school because his father's cough had grown loud enough to be a warning, and he had never opened a textbook again in his life. His English had, for 18 years, remained frozen at the small size it had reached in the 8th grade. He could read a shop sign. He could sign for a delivery. He could, if a foreign tourist stopped in front of his store on their way to the old fort, direct them with 3 or 4 short sentences to the next turn. He had never in his life read a book in English. He had never held a conversation in English of more than a minute. He had never expected, in an ordinary way, that any of this would change. Then, at 32, his daughter Zara turned 4 and started at a small English medium preschool that his wife had chosen for her, with the small, careful hope that many mothers in that city held quietly for their daughters. Zara came home each afternoon with a small blue notebook full of English words her small teacher had written for her to trace. "My name is Zara. This is a cat. I have a red bag." Rashid sat with her on the small mat in their sitting room and helped her in Urdu to trace the letters. He understood the sentences at that level. He knew what a cat was. The moment came in her 3rd month of school, when Zara turned 4.5 and brought home a small piece of paper with a paragraph on it. She looked at him with the small, proud, expectant eyes of a child who wants her father to admire what she is bringing. She said in Urdu, "Papa, please read it to me." Rashid took the paper in his hands. It was a paragraph about a duck. He read the first 3 words. He recognized the 4th. He did not know the 5th. He tried to say it aloud in a way that sounded like he knew it. Zara looked at him. She was 4 years old. She was not stupid. She said kindly in Urdu, "Papa, I think that word is pond." Then she said, "I will read it." And she took the paper back and read the paragraph aloud in the slow, careful voice of a small girl who had been coached in phonics twice a week for 3 months. And Rashid sat on the mat with his hands empty and his face carefully still. That night after Zara was asleep, he told his wife quietly that he wanted to try to learn English properly. His wife looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Why now?" He said, "Because in 8 years she will be 12, and she will need help with her homework, and I do not want her to have to look at me the way she looked at me today." His wife did not laugh at him. She said in Urdu that she thought this was the best reason she had ever heard anyone give for anything, and that she would try too. He was 32. He calculated 8 years. He had tried, over the years, to improve his English in the way most people tried. He had once bought a set of English lessons on CD from a man at a bazaar, and had listened to 3 of the 12 lessons before losing interest. He had once downloaded an app that had promised fluency in 3 months, and had opened it for 11 days in a row, and then never again. He had a small stack of half-finished notebooks in his small office at the back of the store. He knew the shape of his own failure. He did not want to fail again. He watched a small, quiet video on his phone that first week, made by a woman with a soft voice who said something that Rashid had never heard anyone say quite that way before. She said that learning a language was not a straight line, and that most people quit their language learning because they expected it to be. She said that on some days a learner would feel like an English superhero, and on other days would feel like they could not complete a sentence to save their life. She said that this was normal. She said that the trick was not to try harder on the good days, but only to keep going on the bad ones. She said that 15 minutes a day for many years produced better results than 3 hours a day for 2 weeks. She said, gently, that most people who thought they were bad at languages had actually only ever been bad at consistency. Rashid wrote down on the first page of a new notebook in his careful shopkeeper's handwriting one small sentence he made up himself. 15 minutes a day for 8 years until my daughter is 12. He began the next morning. He read one small paragraph from Zara's English book aloud, softly, at his kitchen table with a cup of tea in his hand, before he opened the shop. He wrote, in his notebook, one new word he had learned that day and one small sentence about his morning. Then he closed the notebook and went to work. That was all. Nothing happened for the first month. He did not feel any smarter. He did not feel any less ashamed. But he had promised his wife that he would keep going, and he kept going, because promises to his wife had been the strongest thing in his life for 11 years, and there was no reason to change that now. In the third month, he noticed that he was starting to recognize the small phrases in Zara's schoolbook without having to sound them out one letter at a time. In the sixth month, he read his first small English children's book from start to finish, and it was about a rabbit who lost his mother and found her again, and he cried at the end for reasons that had less to do with the rabbit than he wanted to admit. In the ninth month, he missed a whole week because a cousin from his mother's village got married, and there were 4 days of festivities. He came back to his notebook on the following Monday and wrote in it, at the top of a new page, "I missed a week. I am starting again." He had learned from the small, quiet video that missing a week was not a failure. Only quitting was a failure. He had not quit. By the end of the first year, he had filled the whole notebook. He bought a second one. He wrote on the first page, "This is the second year." He did the same thing for the second year that he had done for the first. By the end of the second year, Zara was 6. She was reading small English chapter books now. He could read them alongside her. She did not always know that he was 1 page behind her, but sometimes she looked up at him at the table, and there was a small, warm surprise in her face, and she said, "Papa, you understood that?" He said, "Yes, small one, Papa understood that." She did not know that he had, the night before, quietly rehearsed the difficult sentences alone with the book at the kitchen table, so that he could read them warmly with her the next day. He did not think she needed to know. By the end of the fourth year, when Zara was 8, he could help her with her English homework at the small kitchen table, 1 sentence at a time. Not perfectly. His grammar was still sometimes wrong. He confused certain tenses. He had learned to say to her, kindly, "Small one, Papa is not always sure. Let us look at it together." It was a sentence he had rehearsed for a long time. He wanted her to grow up thinking that not being sure was not a shameful thing. By the end of the 6th year, when Zara was 10, they read short English news articles together on his phone. He read one article. She read another. They talked about what each meant, sometimes in Urdu, sometimes in English. His wife made tea and listened, and did not always say anything, but he saw her small, warm smile from the kitchen doorway. At the end of the 8th year, Zara turned 12. On a Wednesday evening in September, she came home from school with a small stack of English homework, sat at the small kitchen table beside her father, and said, "Papa, please can you look at this with me?" Rashid put on his reading glasses. He read the questions. He read them slowly. He understood every single one. He helped her in careful, calm English work through the problems. When they were done, Zara looked up at him and said, "Papa, when did you get so good at English?" Rashid smiled. He said in Urdu, "Small one, I have been practicing for 8 years because I promised myself I would be ready when you were 12. Zara did not say anything for a long moment. Then she got up and hugged him for a long time, and Rashid, at 40, sat at his small kitchen table and understood that the 8 years had been worth every one of the 15 minutes. A year later, a younger father from the next lane, a friend of his named Habib, whose own son was starting an English school, sat with Rashid at the tea shop one evening and asked him, in a small, tired voice, whether it was possible for a grown man with a shop and no schooling to learn English well enough to help his child. Rashid thought for a long moment. He looked at Habib, who reminded him painfully of a version of himself. "Yes," he said, "it is possible. It is not fast. 15 minutes a day, every day. About the child's own school book, if you can, keep a small notebook, write in it every morning. Do not quit when you miss a week. Only quit if you quit. In 8 years, your son will be 12, and you will be there when he is." Habib frowned. 8 years, he said. That is a long time. Rashid smiled the small smile of a man who had learned everything the slow way. 8 years passed.